get started with this story from Israel. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the IDF have now entered the West Bank. That happened the other day. We're going to start with this article here from antiwar.com. Shout out to Dave DeCamp for this. Israel forces launch major assault on the West Bank, killing at least 10 Palestinians. So let's get into this. I'll make it a little bit bigger for you. Israeli forces launched a major assault on the West Bank early Wednesday that appears to be the largest Israeli operation in the occupied territory since the Second Intifada in the early 2000s. The assault focused on the northern areas of the West Bank. Now, this includes Jenin, Tulkarm, and Tubas, which were targeted by ground raids and airstrikes. So far, at least 10 Palestinians have been killed in the operation that the Israeli military has said will last for several days. When the attack started, Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz said the West Bank must be dealt with the same way as Gaza and called for the evacuating of Palestinians. Let me highlight this here. See, they tell on themselves. The West Bank must be dealt with the same way as Gaza, calling for the evacuation of Palestinians. So now we see, again, this just reassures the plan, what I was saying before, that they want all of the land. So now they want to demolish the West Bank. Of course, except for the homes that Israeli settlers have already occupied. They want to demolish the rest of the West Bank. They want the land, just like they want the land in Gaza. This is very, very disturbing. And this just continues to spread. This is not, again, when Kamala Harris and Donald Trump tell you that Israel has a right to defend itself. I told you it is difficult for them to use that phrase with the West Bank because Israeli settlers have been stealing Palestinians' homes. Hamas is not in the West Bank. They were just taking their homes because they want the land. That's why you don't hear them talk about the West Bank. That's why they're only talking about, oh, well, Gaza. So always pay attention to that. It goes on to say here, this is Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz. We must deal with the threat just as we deal with the terrorist infrastructure in Gaza, including the temporary evacuation of Palestinian residents and whatever steps are required. Hear this? Whatever steps are required. This is a war for all terms and purposes. We must win it. So see, now all they have to do is say we're at war to take over another area. According to Aretz, the Israeli military said it might allow residents of the areas it's attacking to leave, signaling they could order evacuations. It might allow. Do we see this? They may allow them to leave. The Palestinian Ministry of Health has said that Israeli forces have besieged medical facilities in Jenin and obstructed the movement of vehicles. A spokesman for the Palestinian Red Crescent Society told CNN that getting to the hospital in Jenin is difficult. Here we go again with the hospitals. The Al-Quds brigades, I don't know why I keep saying it that way, brigades, the armed wing of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad announced that its fighters were confronting Israeli forces with heavy volleys of direct bullets and claimed an Israeli drone was drowned. So far, there have been no reports of Israeli casualties in the attack. No reports of Israeli casualties in the attack. But every corporate media outlet is allowing you to believe that the people that are the most threatened right now are the Israeli people. Simone Sanders talked about this on MSNBC. Let's go ahead and bring this in and shout out to Case Study QB for this. Listen here.
Is Nayyera Huq, former White House senior director and former State Department senior advisor. Nayyera, first off, can you just talk to us about the difference between Gaza, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, why the West Bank was established, and just the importance and the significance here of what we're seeing.
Yeah, these are two different territories on opposite sides of Israel that ostensibly are supposed to be part of what the future would have for a Palestinian state. The West Bank has been under the control of the Palestinian Authority. They have administrative control. But in order for people in the West Bank to go to their jobs in Israel, they have to go through Israeli security checkpoints. This has been a big point of contention that Palestinians, even if they live and work in mainland Israel, don't have security control over their own territory. There's technical administrative control. Hamas was elected about 20 years ago, and they control Gaza Strip, and they're a terrorist organization that effectively runs that like a drug cartel would run its territory. So very different visions of how Palestinian governance would work, but both of them, just for the purposes of land, very important for the idea of a two-state solution.
Why was the
Let me pause here for a second. Does everybody see what she just did there? Now, she is a former White House advisor. So you see who they bring on to have these conversations, right? Because she fits the corporate media narrative. So notice what she did there. The conversation is about what happened in the West Bank. So she finds an opportunity to slide in. Well, look at the way Hamas governed Gaza. They operated like a cartel. Right? So you see what she's doing there? That again is to take your focus off of what Israel has just done to Palestinians in the West Bank. Let me bring up Hamas. Let me bring up how they govern Gaza and throw them under the bus so that there isn't as much heat on the IDF for raiding the West Bank. Let's go on some more.
West Bank established?
So this is territory that had been annexed back to Palestinians that had originally been lost in the tussle in the war, the first Arab-Israeli war, which launched effectively after Israel was created as a state. As part of this discussion of who gets what land, Jordan had control over the Temple Mount, which is also a religious site for Muslims. So that has been a place where Muslims, the status quo and the agreement was that Muslims would be allowed to pray there and Jews would be allowed to visit. That is also part of what is being interrupted by Netanyahu and his raids on the West Bank, is changing all of what had been settled, absent any actual negotiation or discussion about what a Palestinian solution is.
The UN Human Rights Office has warned that these raids, they could worsen what is already a very catastrophic situation. So why then would Israel open up a new front? They are literally, we're talking about now conflict and war happening in the Gaza Strip. So on the south, we can put the map back up. Now we're also talking about conflicts between on the border with Lebanon, and we're talking about Hezbollah, also the threat of Iran still coming in. And now they're adding these raids in the West Bank. Why is this something that they would do?
Okay, let me go ahead and answer this before she does. So first of all, what Simone Sanders is basically trying to say without being as obvious about it, why is Israel being aggressive towards all these different areas? When she said, well, there was Gaza and there's Lebanon and now it's the West Bank. That's what she's really saying. Like, why is Israel being aggressive and killing people in all these different areas? So I'm going to tell you the truth, because they want the land. This is not a secret. Now, Simone Sanders, you're a commentator here on MSNBC. Either Simone Sanders didn't do her research or she did do her research, but she knows what she can and cannot say on there to keep that job. Because if Simone Sanders were speaking freely and she did her research, she would already know the answer to this question. She would know that Netanyahu stood up in front of an audience and talked about the plan for a greater Israel, which includes the West Bank, which includes Gaza, parts of Lebanon, and part of Syria. But in order for Simone to sit in that chair and stay in that chair, you see, Mehdi Hassan's not there anymore. They got rid of him. Mehdi knew a little too much about this topic. So Mehdi can still appear on MSNBC as a guest, but Mehdi can't work there. I know, but she is not able to speak freely in that way if she wants to keep that job. That's the reason why they want the land. Listen to what her guest says, the former White House advisor.
Listen, what we've heard from Netanyahu and his administration is that they were trying to stamp out terrorist activity. But in the post 9/11 era, terrorism is everything and everything is terrorism. It just becomes a catch-all excuse. And certainly no evidence has been offered. The the West Bank has different parts of it that were supposed to belong exclusively to Palestinians. And
pause. Let's go back. When she answers this question, listen to what she says about what Netanyahu said. And then I want you to hear again what she says about evidence.
In the West Bank, why is this something that they would do?
Listen, what we've heard from Netanyahu and his administration is that they were trying to stamp out terrorist activity. But in the
Netanyahu said the reason why they are entering Lebanon, they're firing in Lebanon, and now in the West Bank as well, is because they want to stamp out terrorist activity. Now listen to this part.
Post 9/11 era, terrorism is everything and everything is terrorism. It just becomes a catch-all excuse. And certainly no evidence has been offered.
Pause. But no evidence has been offered. So there have been a number of times where reporters, advisors, the State Department does this a lot, where they will repeat Netanyahu's talking points. They will mention that we don't have evidence about that, but they will still repeat the talking points. They'll continue the narrative that Netanyahu made, and that is on purpose because they don't want to say the real thing, which is that the actual terror is not coming from within the countries that they are raiding, the countries that they are coming into. They're killing these people, these civilians. The real threat is Israel because Israel wants the land. The real threat is Zionism because Zionism has become, it's a hateful, racist ideology, and they don't want the Palestinian people there. And I don't know how many times Netanyahu, his administration, how many times they can make it very clear that they don't want them there for people to be able to speak freely about it on corporate media. It's on video. It's in newspapers. So there's evidence for that. But they continue to mention things that there is no evidence for. They still have no evidence that proves that there was SA on October 7th. They have no evidence. This has been admitted multiple times by different networks. But everyone is repeating the talking point in corporate media. Even Mehdi Hassan repeated it when he said he was upset that Kamala didn't mention anything about the assault happening to the Palestinians in the Palestinian detention center, which we do have videos of. But even Mehdi Hassan repeated the same talking point. There's no evidence. The State Department is repeating it. Kamala Harris repeated it at the DNC convention during her speech. Everyone's repeating the Israeli talking points where there's no evidence for. But when it comes to the Palestinian people and the situations that we do have evidence for, they're not even mentioning it. So it's very obvious what's happening here, ladies and gentlemen. Now, Simone Sanders is trying to make it look like she's doing her job of being fair. MSNBC is like, well, we got to try to look like you're doing fair. So make sure you cover what happened in the West Bank because Hamas is not in the West Bank. So you got to make sure you cover this too. But in doing so, she pretends to be naive or unaware or uninformed about what Israel is actually doing. And that is the game, folks.
The West Bank has different parts of it that were supposed to belong exclusively to Palestinians. And Netanyahu, in his 20 years in office, has just kept effectively invading and taking over those spaces. That's part of why Palestinians will talk about this as an occupation.
Settlement expansion. That's what you often hear from from U.S. officials talking about the expansion of the settlements and how settlement.
Pause. Palestinians will talk about, listen to what she said. Palestinians will talk about this and as an occupation. So It is an occupation. And it's not just Palestinians that are calling it an occupation. The UN called it an occupation. If I remember correctly, didn't the ICJ finally call it an occupation? So it's not just the Palestinians that are calling it that. So pay attention to the way that they word certain things around this issue. She says that so that you can think that it's only the Palestinians that see it that way, that it's only coming from them, but it's not only coming from them. Listen.
And taking over those spaces. That's part of why Palestinians will talk about this as an occupation.
Palestinians will talk about this as an occupation. So did the UN. So have human rights organizations. So have the ICJ. I didn't see any Palestinians sitting on the board at The Hague.
Expansion. That's what you often hear from the from U.S. officials talking about the expansion of the settlements
and
how
settlements, right? So settlements are incursions of people who of Israeli citizenship, Jewish mostly, right wingers who are moving into land owned by Palestinians or Arabs right now, right? And they call those settlements. And then in retaliation, Palestinians will say there's an occupation, but that is all.
Let's rephrase this. I'm sorry. Let's rephrase this.
Right. And they call those settlements. And then in retaliation, Palestinians will say there's an occupation. But that is all territory that has been chipped away at. Netanyahu has always said that he has zero interest in negotiating a two-state solution. So while the United States is Jewish, mostly right wingers who are moving into land owned by Palestinians or Arabs right now.
Do you hear the way that she just described that? She said they are moving into it. No, that makes it sound less threatening. That makes it sound less frightening. What do you mean Israeli settlers that are moving into, they are taking their homes? There are videos of them bulldozing Palestinians' homes. You say move in, that makes it sound like they just moved into an apartment. That sounds less harsh, right? Right? So pay attention to the vocabulary that they use. That is ever so important, you guys. Because if I don't know anything about this conflict at all, and I'm just sitting at home and I'm watching this segment, and I'm like, oh, okay, they moved into these homes. If you say move in, that does not sound threatening to me. She's not telling the truth. It's not that they're moving in, they're taking it by force. They're showing up to their homes with guns, with bulldozers. They're stealing their homes when they leave home to go to work. They're taking it by force. Stop this. They moved into, they stole it. We'll finish it up here.
Right. And they call those settlements. And then in retaliation, Palestinians will say there's an occupation. But that is all territory that has been chipped away at. Netanyahu has always said that he has zero interest in negotiating a two-state solution. So while the United States is in this deep domestic, divisive political moment, and he's deep into Gaza, you know, he's also the entire time he's been pushing into the West Bank and effectively at war on three fronts.
So could these raids agitate U.S. allies? First of all, this could agitate the United States. But I'm also thinking about Jordan. I feel as though these raids in the West Bank are not necessarily helpful to what is happening in Cairo when it comes to negotiations on ending the war between Israel and Hamas and getting that ceasefire done and the hostages back.
And this is what some of the hope had been, would be that some officials or leaders from various parts of in the West Bank area would maybe be able to come forward and be leaders over Gaza and have at least a unified government. The more the West Bank comes under attack, the more they will feel entrenched and that they are now also victims and can't work with the Israelis as equal partners in any way. So it makes this idea of a unified or at least a legitimate non-terrorist government harder. I mentioned the Temple Mount for this very specific reason. Up until now, allies like Jordan and Egypt have not felt personally invested in the conflict other than, I guess, humanitarians and people who care about not having explosions throughout the region. But Jordan and Egypt both have serious authority and responsibility over parts of Jerusalem and the West Bank. They will see this as an affront to their sovereignty. These are Israel's allies, right? This is not Iran. So pissing off your allies when you are Israel, while you already have enemies looking to attack you, like Iran, which still is due to retaliate at some point, puts the United States in a very difficult position.
This is a very tough time for diplomacy in the Middle East. Thank you very much.
Well, the United States wouldn't be in a difficult position if they weren't supplying the weapons. The United States' hands would be completely washed of this, but they put themselves in it. And don't even give me that mess about Jordan, because Jordan is going to back the U.S. Whatever the U.S. does, they may be upset about the humanitarian cause and they may want to contribute food and supplies. But Jordan is not going to come to the rescue of the Palestinian people. If that were the case, they would have done that already. So don't even give me that mess about Jordan. Next.